So later on, Madhavisa, in 1972, he came to Sydney as the new GBC member for the South Sea Zone. And so the first thing that he did was introduce that Rath Yatra festival. So we had one chariot the first year. I had been in the movement myself a couple of months. As I said, we got initiated in April. We had the Rath Yatra festival in June. So we spent about 2 months in Melbourne constructing a Rath cart. We made one the first year, and we had the first Rath Yatra festival, and it was quite successful. People enjoyed it. Madhavisa was expert in whatever he did, so he directed everything. The artwork was done by Vaibhavi Dasi, she's the wife of the Utah temple president, Charu Prabhu. So she was quite a good artist, so she drew the Rath Yatra carts. And then we had a small vacant lot in Carlton in Melbourne where we built or constructed the first Rath Yatra, or first Rath cart. I was like the on-the-job foreman, and in those days, of course, we didn't have any money, so whatever we got, we had to procure it, let's say. So every morning we had a couple of boys with a van. They'd come to the Rath site, and they would get from us a list of all the kinds of wooden beams and various paraphernalia that we needed to build this Rath cart. And then in the night time they go out in the van with the list, and during the daytime they would identify which places were, there were a lot of skyscrapers being built, there's a lot of building projects going on in the city, so they'd spend the daytime touring around the building sites to see where they could find the wood to build the Rath cart. Then at night time they'd go with a van, and under cover of darkness they would filch out the different kinds of wood that we needed for the Rath cart and bring that to the site. So that first year that Rath cart was constructed for free. Not that it was necessarily donated, but it was free. So we had a very good Rath Yatra the first year. The next year we decided to have 3 Raths. We used the same method for obtaining the materials that we needed. But shortly after that, then we had to change our modus operandi. In 1974, we had Rath Yatra, and Prabhupada came actually for that Rath Yatra. So Madhavisa had managed to transform our Sankirtan party into the top book distributors around the world. So Prabhupada agreed, all right, I'll come to your Rath Yatra. So when we built the Rath carts, then we needed flowers, of course, but we didn't really have any resources. So again, we resorted to involuntary donations. A van was going out in the evenings just before Rath Yatra day. A van went out. They came back with thousands of carnations, and we made those into flower garlands to decorate the Rath cart. It turned out that the place where they got the carnations from was a professional nursery, and they had these glass houses, greenhouses, as big as this hall, They had about 8 or 9 of them, and a couple of the boys went with a van, and every flower that was in those glass houses was procured for the Rath Yatra. Anyway, we weren't able to use it because on the morning of the Rath, we were just doing the last minute construction and hanging the flower garlands on the Rath cart, and some policemen arrived on the scene. They came with a man who was wearing these rubber boots. He was a farmer, and he was the man who owned the greenhouses where all the flowers were taken from. So one of our men surrendered himself to the police. The police threatened us that if you don't admit to taking these flowers, then we'll have no choice but to shut down your festival. So one of the boys, Samendranath, he went over to the police and he asked them, "Oh, what's the problem?" So they told him, "Some of you guys have taken this man's flowers," and it was his entire crop. That was his livelihood for the next 6 months. And so we're going to close you down. So Samendranath, he said, well, I was the one that took all the flowers. They didn't know anything about it. So they arrested him, and he spent Rath Yatra in prison until they let him out a few days later. So after that, then we decided better not to take any more flowers. It was kind of the way that things were organized in those days. We wanted, everything was more important to do for Krishna than for the karmis. The mentality was that whatever facilities that were there, vegetables, flowers, wood, whatever, it all belonged to Krishna anyway. So it's not that we're stealing from the karmis, but they've stolen from Krishna and we're taking it back. So that was one of our early interpretations of doing things for Krishna. Later on, Prabhupada was informed about it. He told us, he said, "All right, don't do it again." He wasn't angry. He was rather more enthusiastic because we'd taken a risk just for the sake of Krishna consciousness. Anyway, so early days in Sydney and Melbourne, quite exciting. We had lots of problems when we got established doing Sankirtan on a regular basis. We had 25 people, devotees, that would go out in the evenings, and we'd either line up in front of some big store like Woolworths or one of the department stores. We'd be in a line, and then we'd all start chanting Hare Krishna. And we had, in those days, the Prabhupada of the Swami step, where you put your arms up in the air. Prabhupada personally showed us how to do that. Put your hands up in the air and you swing from side to side. Left foot over the right and back again. Right foot over the left, back again. And we'd all be dancing and chanting. Unfortunately, the police didn't really appreciate our Sankirtan activities. The council officers, the guys that give you the parking tickets, so they started to harass us. So after a few weeks or a few months, then whenever we went out on the street to chant, the police would, within about 5 minutes, they come racing around the corner in their, big black Mariahs trucks, and we would be chanting, and we'd watch the police come, and we'd wait to see whether they went straight past or whether they would suddenly stop where we were. And there was one police officer in particular, who hated the devotees. So every time we went out to chant, within a few minutes, the police would arrive. The trucks would come around the corner. The police would screech to a halt. They'd jump out of the vans and grab as many devotees as possible, throw them in the wagon, and take them off to the police station. So, generally speaking, not many of us were caught. Dwaipiana, he was one of my friends. He used to play the guitar. So because he had a guitar, he always got caught. And same with whoever was playing the mridanga, it was difficult to run with the instruments except the cartels. So as soon as the cops came, they'd screech to a halt, jump out of the vans, and then we would run. So you got like 20 devotees running this way, that way, across the road. We would run into the department store and hide. I remember one time the cops came, so we ran into a big store called Myers, believe it or not. It really was Myers. And we saw one of the policemen actually followed us into the store, although they were not allowed to do that. But they were so angry. One cop chased us into the store. We ran up the escalators onto the second floor. That was where all the women's clothing was being sold. So we just squeezed in where the racks were hanging the clothing. We'd squeeze in, behind the clothes so they couldn't see us. We saw this policeman come in, he was looking, couldn't see anything, so he left. So it was kind of exciting. Considering we were all 20, 21 years old. Some of the devotees were only 17 or 18. So it was a big adventure. We would get caught sometimes. We'd get charged. Sometimes they would levy a fine, especially in Melbourne. It was going on there as well. And we would just ignore it. We'd just keep on going with our Sankirtan activities. So after a month or two in 1972 of getting harassed by the police, then we decided we had to switch tactics. So instead of going out on the street chanting all day, we decided to go door to door, selling books from one door to the next. That was only limitedly successful because most people were at work during the daytime. So when we came round, usually there was nobody in. One or two people, they would open the doors, they'd see, like a brahmachari, shaved head, seeker, tilak, bang, they'd slam the door in your face. And one or two people, they were a little attracted. So we tried that for a month or two. That didn't work out so well. We tried another tactic. Instead of having all the devotees go out in one big group, we would go out in small groups. So you'd have on every street corner 2 devotees, one playing cartels, the other one selling Back to Godhead magazine. After half an hour we'd switch around like that. Then of course the cops would come and then arrest us again. So it was getting difficult. Then they resorted to another tactic. The city council officers had received so many complaints about the devotees. So Madhavisa, when he arrived in Australia in May of '72, he decided that we would reduce the size of the chanting party to 4 or 5, and we would keep moving. Previously, we would have a big group. We would stand on a street corner, the same street corner, for hours and hours. So all the office workers that were in the buildings around where we were chanting, they were flipping out. These Hare Krishnas are driving us mad. All we hear all day long is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So instead of having a big group in one place, we decided to have one small group, continuously moving through the streets of Sydney. So the council, they decided to try to get us banned completely. So after we'd gotten chanting and going down the street, a couple of guys would come up. One had a notebook, the other one, he had a camera. They would take each devotee's photo, and then they would write down the person's name. And then it was all kind of friendly, no hassle. So we'd just stand and pose for the photo. We'd give them some name, Prasadam Das, what's your name, Samsara, whatever names we could think of. And that was it. They would go back. So they were building up a case. So I think in September maybe of 72, our vice president, temple vice president, Charu Prabhu, he wrote to Srila Prabhupada. He explained the situation, that we were getting harassed and what to do. He'd found out that if we hired a lawyer, because the council had brought a case against us, so if we hired a lawyer, it was going to cost $1,000, and we had no hope of paying that money. So True asked if we could get a loan from the BBT. So Prabhupada wrote back. He said this, what's the use of getting a big lawyer? You simply spend so much money, and at the end of the day, if we go to court and we lose, then legally they'll be able to stop us from our Sankirtan activities. So he said the best thing is that you continue on as you have been doing. Just go out on Sankirtan, never mind whether they arrest us or not, it doesn't matter. So, but I don't think that getting a big lawyer will be of any help. You just depend on Krishna and chant the Maha Mantra as you've been doing. And then at the bottom of the letter in his own handwriting, Prabhupada put, he said, P.S. There's no difference between our chanting in the street or our chanting in the temple or our chanting in prison. He said if we have to go to jail, then let them jail us, but we won't stop chanting. So that's what happened, more or less. A few months later, they actually brought this case before the magistrates, and none of the devotees turned up to defend ourselves because Prabhupada had already told us just go out on Sankirtan. So that's what we did. So we knew that the course was going on, but we didn't care. We just continued on chanting. So at the end of the trial, the judge was quite annoyed with the city council because they had brought their so-called evidence, some photographs and names, and the judge said, so where are these people? Where is this Prasadam Das? We don't even know if he's in Sydney anymore. He could be in another city. So he dismissed the whole case, and then at the end of it, he added his own comment. He said, actually, why not let them chant? They add a lot of color to the city. So I think he must have seen us chanting on the streets sometimes, the judge. He thought we were okay. So the council lost that case against us. We had just stuck with Prabhupada's instruction. You know, it doesn't matter on the street, in the temple, or in the jail, just keep on chanting Hare Krishna. And it worked out very successfully. Yeah. Of course, we had in Melbourne similar problems. In Sydney, it was kind of, they persecuted us for about 9 months or a year. Then they decided that it wasn't worth the time and effort and money. Although they'd spent $10,000 to bring this court case against us to get us banned. One newspaper man, he had written an article that why is it that such nice, gentle people had been persecuted so much, he couldn't understand it. So he went to a psychologist to ask, why such a reaction against such nice people. And the psychologist's answer was that our simple lifestyle and, our view of the, human life, if you like, people see that and they feel that it's a threat to their own existence. We're just singing and dancing and we're not going to work and earning money, and somehow or another things are going on. So that simple lifestyle, this man said, that was a threat to, the regular materialistic work from 9 till 5. People resented it, so that's why we got such a reaction. So anyway, in Melbourne it was a similar kind of situation, but the council officer that was dealing with us, he was a real demon, and he would hunt us down wherever we were. Sometimes they would raid the temple in the early morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. This man would be there. His name, I forget his real name, but we used to call him Square Jaw. He was a little fat man with a thick neck, and so we used to call him Square Jaw. And he was so fanatic that he had memorized the names of all the devotees, both their spiritual names and their legal names. And he was keeping a track, because we were going out, we would get arrested for obstruction or loitering or something like that. The case would go up to court. We wouldn't turn up. They would fine us $40 or $100 or $200, and we just keep on going. So if you didn't pay your fine, then they had the right to come and arrest you, and they could put you in prison, and the time that you spent in the prison was equivalent to how many fines that you owed. So one day in prison was $40 off your fine. So when I got arrested, I had $80 owing on my fines. Actually, I made a mistake because I didn't think I had any fines against me. The police raided the temple, and they asked, and this man Square Jaw was there, and he came up to me. He said, Dennis Harrison. He said, $80, take him away. So myself and the temple president, Sanak Prabhu, Sanak owed about $800. It's like 10 days in jail. So we were both taken together to the local constabulary. They had what they call a watch house, so some temporary cell. So they put us in there, and then in the late afternoon they came and took Sanak away because he owed, $800 or $1,000. So they took him to the main prison. It's called Pentridge. That's where all the thieves and rogues and murderers, you name it, they're all in that Pentridge prison. So they were putting the devotees in the Pentridge prison. Kurma Prabhu, our Australian chef, he also was arrested and put in. So as soon as they put them in the lockup, then the devotees immediately went on a fast. So some of them actually fasted for 8 or 10 days. It became a big thing in the newspapers. We had TV personalities coming forward and demanding that the harassment should stop. We're gentle people, we're non-violent. Why you should be arresting them? So it became a big thing in the newspapers, and Prabhupada told us that that's what we should do. He said just like in London, they were getting arrested. So they got arrested so many times so that eventually the police stopped arresting us. It was just too much. And the police were getting embarrassed because they were arresting the Hare Krishnas. So sometimes when we got captured, then people would gather around. Like we would go downtown in Melbourne, and sell magazines, and sometimes Square Jaw would come up with a couple of cops. Oh, that's him, grab him. And as soon as they made an attempt to arrest us, we'd throw ourselves on the ground in the middle of the traffic on the street. So the policemen were very embarrassed. They had 4 of them at a time, had to pick us up, put us in the van and take us away. And the citizens would gather around and they would tell the police, why don't you get a real job? You're arresting the Hare Krishnas. Why don't you go and find some real criminals and arrest them? So the cops were embarrassed. They didn't like it. But this man was persistent in pushing us. So when Sanak and I got arrested, Sanak was taken off to Pentridge prison. I only had 2 days worth of fines, so I spent 1 night in the cell. The next morning, the policemen at the desk, they had to feed us. So, the night before, they brought me a meat pie. That was my, meal for the day. And I said, I can't eat that. Why not? Because it's not vegetarian. So the next morning, he turned up. He had a pie, and it was a vegetable pie. So he said, "Here you go, 1 vegetable pie." I said, "No, I can't eat that." Why? Because it's not been offered. So the cop looked. What? He said, "Offered? What do you mean it's not been offered?" I said, "We can't eat anything unless it's been offered." So he said, "Well, I went down the street to the grocery store. I bought you a vegetable pie. I brought it back, and now I'm offering it to you." I said, no. I said, it has to be offered on the altar to Krishna. Otherwise, I can't eat it. So he went off. 5 minutes later, the desk sergeant, he came around and said, "What's this? You're not eating?" I said, "No, it's not offered. I'm not going to eat it." He said, "All right, get out." So he threw me out of the jail, sent me back to the temple. He didn't want the hassle. But the other devotees that had, substantial amounts, they had to stay in jail. And it was big publicity. So anyway, somehow or another, we had a fairly big impact on the citizens of Australia. And it was all, fueled by Srila Prabhupada. As long as, he said, just keep on going out. Doesn't matter if you're arrested or not. We can chant Hare Krishna anywhere. So we did. Because Prabhupada wasn't fanatical. He knew that in places like America or London or Sydney, there were actually citizens' rights. But in a place like Moscow, when devotees started going there was a big risk. You could be arrested, you could be thrown into Siberian prison and never seen again. So Prabhupada never advised us to do anything foolish, but at the same time he wanted this movement to be spread. We had volunteered our life and soul to doing what Prabhupada wanted us to do, and he took our youthful exuberance and enthusiasm, and he used that for establishing many, many temples all around the world. It's a bit, I often think it's a bit like Maharaj Yayati, and Puru. He got the youth from his son and enjoyed for some time doing his activities. So I always think that same with Prabhupada, although he began his preaching at 70 years old. That was when he started. So he used our youthful enthusiasm to spread very rapidly. He could never have done it. As he said, I was loitering on the street in New York, and he said, you were also hippies loitering in the street. So just like there was one man, he was a musician, so he found a piece of wire, he found a pumpkin gourd, he found a piece of wood, and he combined them together and made a musical instrument. So he said, similarly, he said, I was loitering, you were loitering, but combined together now we make nice music. So the music was chanting Hare Krishna and going out on Sankirtan. So if you think about what Prabhupada did, it's like it's impossible. No ordinary man could have done anything like that. 10 years, traveled all over the world 14 times, started up a worldwide movement, which now, although we had 108 temples when Prabhupada left, they say at least now we have over 800 centers, including restaurants, schools, whatever. So that was the seed that Prabhupada planted. And he was very, enthusiastic for the preaching to go on and be spread everywhere. So when the first time I saw Prabhupada, as I say, was in 1972, I was a bit apprehensive. Not that I didn't believe anything that he was saying, but just I'd never seen him before, so whether he would live up to my expectation or not, that was a doubt. I'd been working for 6 months in the northwest of Australia before I met the devotees. I bought one magazine, but myself and 3 friends, we had emigrated from England to go to Australia, and after a couple of weeks we went north. So the first day of arrival in Sydney, we bumped into the devotees. They were out chanting in the middle of the city. So I was immediately attracted, and I bought a Back to Godhead, number 37. It had the Rasa Leela dance on the front. So I was very attracted, and I bought one. But there was about a dozen guys in a group that we got off the boat together, and none of them were interested. So anyway, I kept this magazine. Then I went off to the north to earn some money. So I spent 6 months on a mining camp on the surface, not underground. And I saved up about $1,500, which was the most money I'd ever had in my whole life. Yeah, when I left school, I got a job as an apprentice in the steelworks, and I was paid £4 a week. That was my whole wage. So after going to Australia, in 6 months I managed to save about $1,500. And as was the fashion in those days, I'd grown my hair, Beatles style. It was hanging down off my shoulders. So I'd made a vow that I was never going to cut my hair again. Yeah, I was going to keep it, just let it grow. But then I met the devotees, and after 6 months in the mining camp, I tried chanting a little bit. I've been reading this Back to Godhead, just little bits at a time. And gradually, I started to understand what it was. So I decided to leave the 3 friends that I was with in the north. I went back down to Sydney to find the devotees. And as soon as I found them, I sat down and discussed the philosophy. I immediately realized this is it. This is what life is for. So I joined. So as soon as I joined, I shaved off all my hair, which I'd vowed never to do. And I gave all my possessions to the temple. They just bought a double-decker bus to convert into a traveling temple, but they had no money to fix it up. So I gave my $1,500 savings. We bought that bus. So that way, we literally gave everything that we had, including ourselves, to somebody that we'd never met before. Yeah, we'd read obviously we read Bhagavad Gita, we read BTG. Bhagavatams were just coming out in those days, 1 chapter at a time. So we were reading and having classes, but we literally sacrificed everything we had to be utilized by Srila Prabhupada for his mission of, spreading the holy name all around the world. So naturally I was a bit apprehensive, whether I would be as impressed with Prabhupada in real life as I was when I read his books. So when Prabhupada arrived, actually, his arrival at the airport was, there was nobody there to greet him. We had got some mix-up was there, and we'd been told that he was arriving on such and such a time. So we were just getting ready to go on the bus to the airport to pick him up, and Prabhupada suddenly arrived in a taxi from the airport. They landed. There was Shyama Sundar was the secretary, Nanda Kumar was the personal servant, and Pradyumna Prabhu was Prabhupada's editor. So they'd come with Prabhupada to Sydney, and when they arrived at the airport, they came out the immigration, nobody was there. So they had to get a taxi to come to the temple. It was fortunate because devotees had a habit, at least in Sydney, we'd moved from one place to another very rapidly. So as soon as the address was printed in one Back to Godhead magazine, we'd already moved out and moved on somewhere else. So somehow or another, when Prabhupada arrived, they had the right address. I mean, we had, there was always the chance that he had arrived and he would not have found us. But somehow or another, we had the right address. Prabhupada came by taxi. I was in the front row of the temple, cleaning the bus, getting ready to go to the airport. And then the bus driver, Raghunath Prabhu, he suddenly jumped up. He said, "He's here, he's here." And he ran through the temple shouting, "Prabhupada's here, Prabhupada's here." So I got out the bus. I offered my full-length dandabats on the street in front of the temple. And then I got up, and Prabhupada stepped out of the car with his little company of men. And then Mohanananda, who was getting changed in one of the rooms, he heard the shout, "Prabhupada's here, Prabhupada's here." So he ran out with his dhoti kind of half hanging off. And when he saw Prabhupada, he was so ecstatic and happy that he flung his arms around Prabhupada like this and gave him a big hug. Even I knew as a bhakta, you're not supposed to hug your spiritual master. Anyway, he was so enthusiastic. Prabhupada didn't say anything, he just smiled. Then he remembered to offer his obeisances, Mohanananda. Anyway, so the first thing that struck me about Prabhupada when I saw him get out of the taxi was that he was very small. Prabhupada was 5 feet 4 inches. So, I mean, I'm a fairly small person, but even I was taller than Prabhupada. So that was the first impression, that Prabhupada's really small. You know, we've been reading for weeks and weeks everything Prabhupada had been writing. We had this expectancy. So when I saw him, he was very, not tiny, but small. But he had this presence, this, somehow or another, everything stopped around him. Yeah. And later on, I found out there was a name for that occurrence. When you saw Prabhupada, you just could not do anything except think about Prabhupada, do what Prabhupada wanted you to do, take instructions from him. You were completely surrendered. So Upendra, as I mentioned, he was one of the first 2 devotees to go to Australia. He was in Sydney at that time when I joined in 72. And he told us, I remember him telling me just before Prabhupada was due to come, he said, actually there is a platform which is higher than even Krishna consciousness. I mean, you know, the philosophy was Krishna is the ultimate everything. There's nothing higher than Krishna. But Upendra told me, he said, there's nothing higher than Krishna consciousness except Prabhupada consciousness. He said that's an even higher state than Krishna consciousness. So after Prabhupada had been with us for about a week or 10 days, we were just completely absorbed day and night in thinking about Prabhupada. We were still doing our preaching activities. Every day we would go out on the bus or downtown and sell books and magazines. Prabhupada was staying in a house that had been loaned to him for the purpose by another devotee who he was a university professor, that was Wally, so he got initiated. So Prabhupada was staying in his house, but that was several miles away. So we didn't see Prabhupada in the daytime, but he was coming in the evening, every evening, and lecturing. And the word was out. We put posters up everywhere, and we were giving out leaflets. So a fairly big crowd of people were coming every evening to hear Prabhupada lecture. So it was very exciting, very absorbing. And when Prabhupada left, there was this curious phenomena that he felt like, oof, now all the energy's gone. And we had actually a couple of devotees, one in particular, he was 17 years old, his name was Rajendra. So he got initiated, and then a couple of days later Prabhupada flew on to New Zealand, and then this boy just left, just quit the temple and disappeared. In those days it was called blooping. Apparently Prabhupada had come up with that phrase himself, that in the early days he'd been informed that such and such a devotee now has left us. So Prabhupada said, oh, he's blooped. Bloop. So that bloop, he said, that's the sound of the soul falling back down into the ocean of material existence, like you throw a rock in the water. Bloop. So this boy, Rajendra, he blooped. After only 2 days being initiated, he was gone. So that was reported to Srila Prabhupada in New Zealand. And Prabhupada, his reply was, well, he did not accept me, and I do not accept him. And that was it. I think we saw him about a year later, something, but he just kind of disappeared. Anyway, so things were up and down. Yeah, we had very little to work with except Prabhupada's words, his example, and that was our inspiration for everything that we did. And if it wasn't Prabhupada conscious, we didn't want to know about it. So I don't know how long we're supposed to go on for. It's 11:30. That's just a little background, what it was like in those days. So if you like, we can stop at this point and take any questions or comments. So you have questions? Yeah. If anybody has any questions, put your hand up or... No questions. In 1973, Prabhupada came again to Sydney, and he also went to Melbourne. Actually, he arrived in Melbourne first, and then we came to Sydney. And we did the usual thing. We hired the town hall. We put posters up everywhere. That year, I think the poster was, the Back to Godhead, there's a silhouette of Srila Prabhupada with his finger up on the masthead of the Back to Godhead. So we made a poster of that, and then we plastered it all over the buildings and work sites in Sydney. And we hired the town hall, and then we were kind of disappointed because in 72 in Melbourne over 2,000 people had come, but in Sydney in 73 there's just like a couple of hundred people, maybe not even that many. And Prabhupada gave a very, very wonderful lecture, and at the end of it he asked, now is there any questions? So not one person put their hand up. out of several hundred people, nobody asked any questions. So several times the devotee said, if anybody has any questions, this is a chance now. If you have some doubts, you can clear it by talking or getting an answer directly from Prabhupada. Still no questions. So apparently afterwards Prabhupada made the comment, he said, they're all dullards, meatheads. Not one question. We gave a nice talk, they're all meatheads. So don't be a meathead. Let's have some questions. Any question? All right, we got one there. Krishna, bring it, Prabhu.
Prabhu, so I heard all these stories. So
He's from Hong Kong, by the way, if you didn't know. Hong Kong? Yes.
so seem to be, could you explain a little bit, shed some light regarding...
I'm going deaf, you have to.
Yes.
Just speak louder into the microphone.
Okay. So could you explain, in the earlier day, seem to be so much difficulties we are facing in order to preaching Krishna consciousness, compared with nowadays, more easier. We have so many facility and many manpower and financial and Lakshmi. So how Krishna give us so much difficulty for the pioneer for our movement? Seem to be very difficult.
Any spiritual development is always situated on tyag, renunciation. If you want to achieve anything spiritually, then you have to be prepared to sacrifice whatever you've got. That's a kind of a test, so that Krishna can see whether you're really serious or not. Yeah, if everything is easy, you just walk in and, you don't have to do any work. You don't really get the excitement and the realization that you get from going out and doing something difficult. If you do something difficult and you come through, it's like Shama Sundar Prabhu, his 2 books that he's written, Chasing the Rhino. So Prabhupada used that as an example, that if you're going out hunting, then hunt for a rhinoceros. Yeah, because it's so ferocious an animal. If you don't capture the rhino, everybody will say, well, it was a good effort. He's a rhino, so you wouldn't have caught him anyway. And if you do catch a rhino, then they say, oh, it's done something wonderful. So you don't lose either way. Yeah, but the idea is that Krishna consciousness is not meant to be a life of luxury. We're not opening free hotels. Yeah, Prabhupada didn't just want us either to give him or him to give us something material. Yeah, he wanted something, that sacrifice, surrender unto me. It means literally surrender everything to Krishna. So at least in the beginning there was nothing. I was listening to either a conversation or a lecture that Prabhupada was giving, and he said that actually his health broke down. He started having bad health from 1965 onwards. So just at the beginning point, 65, he just arrived in New York. From that point on, Prabhupada said, I was always sick. I was always sick. Yeah. Because we know about the heart attacks, we know about the seasickness that he experienced on the Jaladuta, and then we know about the 3rd heart attack that he had in 1967 in New York, when they actually had to put him in the hospital. So from that time onwards, Prabhupada said, I was always sick. There was never a time when Prabhupada had good health, at least not when we knew him, from the time of the beginning of iskcon. When I was traveling with him, that was in 1975, 76, 77. So there was always something wrong. he had a diseased kidney, so he would get this uremia where it makes your hands and feet swell up with fluid. His teeth were all falling out. I have one in my house. Tamal Krishna Maharaj went into Samadhi with one. So all of his teeth were falling out. He had very high blood pressure. He had heart palpitations. I mean, there were so many things, to hamper what he was doing, but Prabhupada just ignored them and kept on going, kept on going, kept on going. It wasn't until 77 when finally, after 10 years, it was very strenuous, what Prabhupada called my very hard work. Yeah. Just as he began iskcon, that was when he started getting sick. And all through the whole period. And yet, iskcon was expanding exponentially. Yeah. Very rapidly. So he had to deal with that. He had to write his books. If you look at just that one activity of, translating the Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada didn't begin that until 1960. So what was he at that time? 64 years old. So he began at 64 years old. He decided to translate a work which is 18,000 verses. And not only translate, but he decided to give commentaries, word for word transliteration. So when he came out with his first volume of the Bhagavatam, one of his acquaintances, he couldn't understand. He's so old. This is such a huge work. How is it possible that you can do such a thing? So Prabhupada, there's a preface in the second volume where Prabhupada says that this friend asked me, how is such a thing possible? And my reply is that in the heavenly planets, there's not just one Bhagavatam, there are millions of Bhagavatams in the heavenly planets, all meant for glorifying Krishna. So what is that? I'm just doing one small version of the Bhagavatam, but there are millions of them. So when Prabhupada started writing the Bhagavatam, and he was working on it mainly in the daytime, he curtailed a lot of his other activities. You'll see no Back to Godhead magazines were published after 1960 until he came to America, because he was working on the Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada's working on the Bhagavatam. If you work it out, one canto took 4 years. So another 11 cantos at the same rate would have been another 44 years. That means Prabhupada would have been about 114 years old. Yeah, if he'd have calculated it. I mean, who would sit down and decide to do such a work? And it required the greatest amount of scholarship, to do it properly. Who would have actually even thought of doing such a thing when you knew that, you're going to be about 115 years old by the time it's finished? But Krishna appreciated his effort. It was an austerity. As iskcon expanded, he stopped sleeping. That was one advice that Prabhupada gave us. If you don't have enough time during the day to do all your activities, including your sadhana and your service, then stop sleeping. Reduce your sleeping. So that's what Prabhupada did. He started translating between 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning. We were all asleep. But Prabhupada was up working. And then in the daytime, he had an endless stream of activity that he was conducting with all these up-and-coming temples and the book distribution, the establishment of the BBT. I mean, the austerities that are involved in doing all of that work, who can do such a thing? Not possible. And yet, Krishna, working with or through Srila Prabhupada, established and fulfilled that prediction from 500 years ago. So nowadays, as you say, you're kind of walking into a structure. But in the early days, there was no such structure. They didn't really start having Mongol Arati until about 1969 or 1970. Yeah, before that, devotees would go out, chant on the streets, come back late at night. You know, they'd crash out, get up at 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. But as soon as Prabhupada started to establish another major feature of this movement, the installation of deities all around the world, then there had to be a proper sadhana. They had to get up early in the morning, wake up the deities, cook 6 offerings a day, offer them new clothes, put them to bed at night, 9 o'clock, 9:30. Very hard work. But Prabhupada started all of these things and Krishna reciprocated. Let's take that example of writing. So Prabhupada was handwriting on loose sheets of paper. When Hayagriva met him in New York and told him that he was an English professor, then Prabhupada immediately engaged him in retyping all the handwritten stuff that he'd done in the translation of the Bhagavatam. Yeah, so he had him type it all up. There was more than 2,000 pages. Prabhupada had handwritten 2,000 pages and he was just beginning. So how would he continue on, you know, in such a prolific way? Obviously handwriting was not an option. Typing it on those manual typewriters also was not an option. But either Gargamuni or Prabhupada had seen one day in a shop this dictaphone. And Prabhupada immediately realized, if I have that dictaphone, I can simply speak everything on a tape, and then one of my disciples, new disciples, they can type it all out. So instead of taking 4 years to do one canto, now he could do a canto every year or even quicker than that. By the time Prabhupada left, the BBT, they would receive Prabhupada's latest translation work, and within 6 weeks they had it fully, you know, ready for distribution, printed, all the paintings included, 6 weeks. So what took Prabhupada, you know, practically 4 years to do in India, he was getting done in 6 weeks by the end of his stay with us. That's Krishna's arrangement. That's Krishna's reciprocation. That Prabhupada was so intent on doing this service. That was Prabhupada's personal service. All the other stuff was for us. But for Prabhupada, his austerity, his service was writing, commentating on the Bhagavatam. So he did it, and Krishna reciprocated. He gave him the tools by which he could fulfill that desire to perform his service. Is that all right? Another question? Yeah. Actually, just recently I've been working on a new book called Back to Vrindavan, which deals with the last 6 weeks of Prabhupada's stay with us. I had booked in to be Prabhupada's visiting GBC secretary for the month of October in 1977. So the day that I arrived in Bombay to take up that 1 month service, Prabhupada had all the senior men called into his room, and he asked us whether he should stay in Bombay, where they were coming close to completing the Juhu Beach temple, or should he go to Vrindavan. And we all voted that it should go to Vrindavan. I asked actually, is it for preaching or is it for health? So Prabhupada said it's for health. So we all voted for Prabhupada to return to Vrindavan. So I was there for that last month, except the last 2 weeks. So it was incredible. Prabhupada was in such a physical condition, he literally could not move. if he wanted to roll over on his side, we had to manhandle him, so to speak, and move him onto his side, or sit up or anything. Couldn't do anything. So that last month, Prabhupada's been with us. Still, in the middle of the month, he started translating the Bhagavatam again. Whereas previously he had been translating, in a secluded room. Nobody was allowed in when Prabhupada was translating his books. But in October of '77, he was physically completely incapacitated, but still translating the Bhagavatam. He had his editors. Pradyumna Prabhu was doing the Sanskrit. So he was reading out the Sanskrit. Prabhupada was listening. What's his name? Jayadvaita Maharaj, he was the English editor. He was holding the microphone. And between them, they were doing the translation work. That's the kind of, determination that Prabhupada had. That right up until the very last week that he was on the planet, with a body that he said was literally just skin and bone. But still he was doing his service, still he was translating the Bhagavatam. It's, he told George Harrison actually in 1976 in July, George came to see Prabhupada at the Manor, and Prabhupada presented it with the newest volume of the 7th canto, and George really appreciated it, and he was kind of stunned. He said, I don't know how he does it. He said, I can't even read that much, what to speak about, write it. And Prabhupada's reply was, he said, yes. He said, it is not humanly possible. It wasn't just saying, that was not just like a throwaway line. He meant it literally. It's not, what he was doing with his books was not humanly possible. Sorry.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for your class. I had a question. You were talking about in the beginning how when you joined, you were able to just give up literally everything for Prabhupada because of the faith you had. I was wondering if you could share some more like modern day techniques for preaching, because I've experienced like with some of the non-devotee friends I have, when they hear about the life that I live and like the things that I do, like how early I have to wake up and the foods that I don't eat and the vows that I've taken, they get really intimidated and they're like, oh, I can never do this in my life. Like, I don't want to do it.
That's your karmi friends.
Yes. Yes.
Well, another thing that you have to give up when you become a devotee is the association of 99% of all the people that you know.
Yeah, that's also true.
They're not interested. One of the guy friends of mine that I emigrated from England to Australia with, I went with 3 friends. We were all school buddies. So I'm still in touch with 2 of them. One of them I brought here to I managed to persuade him to come to Mayapur 2 years ago. And he was my closest friend at school. So when I joined, because he went back to England, but even though I give him prasadam, I brought him here. He was here in Mayapur for 10 days. He and his partner went to Vrindavan for a day or so, and his wife told me actually when they were in Vrindavan, she woke up in the afternoon and she couldn't find him. So she went into the temple, and there's, not Indra, but his group. They were there chanting, as they always do. So my friend Chris, he actually sat down and he chanted with them, just spontaneously. So his wife was quite surprised, and she was interested a little bit in the Krishna consciousness. But the problem, I don't know exactly what holds him back, but he just cannot surrender. He's still smoking dope. Yeah, he still can't stop eating meat, and still he's friendly, he's supportive, he appreciates what we're doing, but he just doesn't have the sukriti to be able to take it up. And I think that that's really what it gets down to. He's going to have many lifetimes, you know, of he really likes what they call them in Gujarat, those like noodles, what they call them, chidwa. Anyway, he likes all those fried things. So he loves prasadam. Whenever I see him, he stuffs it. But he cannot get over these bad habits. So he needs, some more time, maybe a few more lifetimes. He'll get it eventually because he's been to Mayapur and he takes prasadam now and again. They actually, on my request, when they returned to England, I told them that in Leicester they're having Rath Yatra, you might want to go. So they actually went to Rath Yatra also. But he just cannot give up his bad habits. So you'll find that most people, they don't have the kind of sukriti which is required, which impels you to give up your material life and take up spiritual life. They don't have it. Because if they get association with devotees on a regular basis, gradually they'll develop some attraction for it. But don't be surprised if when you become a devotee that you have no friends. One more.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu, for the nice class, inspirations about the journey in the iskcon life. It was all good when Prabhupada was here, but what happens when he left this material world? How did you guys fill up the vacuum left behind by him?
Well, Prabhupada always said that I'm in my books. No difference between the book Bhagavatam and the person Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada said, I'm not writing these books for the karmis. He said, I'm writing them for you. And he meant it. He said, one of the problems is that my disciples think that these books are just for selling, but they don't read them. But if you don't read Prabhupada's books, you won't last very long. We saw a lot of people leave iskcon after Prabhupada's disappearance, not just because, there was problems with the Acharya system that we had, problems with the, school kids, the gurukuls being misused, etc. The real, I think that one of the main reasons why people left is because they didn't seriously read Prabhupada's books enough on a regular basis. So gradually, what should have been knowledge, solid knowledge within the heart, it just became sentiment. They have that sentiment towards Srila Prabhupada, but they don't have any appreciation of their God brothers and God sisters, nor do they go out and preach. So whatever advancement they made up to the point, of Prabhupada's departure, that's it. They haven't continued on, at least enough. I'm not saying everybody, but a good portion of devotees or ex-devotees that I know, it's because it's become sentiment rather than solid, established knowledge within the heart. So if you want to, avoid leaving, I presume that you were initiated by Jayapataka Maharaj, or who's your guru?
His Holiness B. Krishna Goswami Maharaj?
B. Krishna?
Goswami Maharaj.
Yes. So if you imbibe the teachings, and you'll remain fixed. But if you take it cheaply, yeah, books are for selling but not for reading, then you won't last very long.
Thank you.
That goes for all of us. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So it is a very nice opportunity to ask you. I'm been hearing about the 50% of Srila Prabhupada's movement left for us is a, I think you know, that I've been hearing that is development of Varnashram. So I want some like more authentic explanation of this statement and this Sravana Utsav, like in this.
If you want to if you want to know what Varnashram is, you're not talking to the right person. I can tell you one story about that. In 1976, in December, Prabhupada went to Hyderabad, and there was one family there, the Bidrukas, Hari Prasad Bidruka. They had gifted to iskcon, it was a joint trust actually, about 560 acres of land. And so at the beginning of December 76, once the legalities had been firmed up, then Prabhupada agreed to go down to Hyderabad. It's a place outside actually called Medchow. And so he agreed to go down there for about 12 days, which was normally, it was longer than what he normally would spend in any place, except Vrindavan and Mayapur. Anyway, so we had been in Vrindavan for 3 months, practically. And now it was time to go down to Hyderabad. So myself and Jagadish Prabhu, who was Prabhupada's secretary, we were already in the car, or getting in the car, when Prabhupada came out of his rooms and got in the car to drive to Delhi and then fly down to Hyderabad. So as Prabhupada got into the car, he said, now we're going to start a new phase of this movement. So, and then he sat down and didn't say anything more. So Jagadish said, well, what is that, Srila Prabhupada? Prabhupada said very simply, Varnashram. So he had an idea to make this 500 acres into establish a Varnashram community. And just very short and simple, all the people in the area were all farmers. So Prabhupada's idea was that every night we have a small pandal on our land. We invite all the villagers from around to come and attend the pandal. After the pandal, 5 minutes talking maximum, nothing else. And then give them some sumptuous prasadam. He said after a while, their hearts will become clear from chanting and eating prasadam. Then they may become attracted to live as devotees do. We can give them 1 acre, 2 acres of land. You establish like a little village, maybe 10 or 12 houses or families. And then in another part of the property, do the same there. So you have these little hamlets, yeah, or villages dotted all around. In each hamlet, they have a deity of Lord Vishnu, or Radha Krishna, Lakshmi Narayan, Balkrishna, Balaji. So as long as any Vishnu Tattva, it's fine. They have a deity. Everybody gets up early in the morning for Mangalarati. They bathe. They worship the deity. Then in the daytime they go out and work on the land. They're all farmers. Then in the evening they come back, wash again, go to the temple, have kirtan, bas. That was Prabhupada's program for establishing Varnashram, Very simple. I think sometimes our devotees get too complicated. He used to say, Prabhupada used to say, that's the problem with you Westerners. You're too much sophisticated. It's a simple thing. It's a very simple thing. But nobody's done it so far. Because you have to couple that with self-sufficiency. We do have one or two places, like in Hungary, and I'm told there are one or two places in India now where they're working towards complete self-sufficiency, at least as far as food goes. But what you need for that, Prabhupada said, you build from local material, you can build your own house, you can grow your own medicine, you can grow your own food, you can make your own clothes, and that's it. With that, minimum amount, live simply, simple living, high thinking. Now we seem to have gotten to a place where we're, when we talk about Varnashram, it's all high thinking but no simple living. That's the problem. One of the challenges is that we're addicted to electricity. Yeah, if you look and see what aspects of your life are governed by the need for electricity, it's practically 99%. So we're addicted to these kind of artificial constructs. But Varnashram means living in tune with nature. Modern scientists nowadays, their whole idea is how to conquer nature. Yeah, this unified field theory, where they find the link, all the different forces in the universe, the weak, the strong, the magnetic. If they can somehow or another figure out how to harness that energy, then they can do whatever they like. There's this machine called a Large Hadron Collider. It splits atoms. So they were hoping that if they can split the atom, they can find out where the energetic charge comes from. Because molecules, atoms, they move. But nobody knows why they move, how they move. They're splitting the atom, finding protons and neutrons, but they're also moving. So what's making them all move? They don't know. But if they do find out, so one newspaper man, he asked one of these scientists that's working on the Large Hadron Collider, I mean, you spent $10 billion on this machine. It's 17 miles long, by the way. It's in a circle. You spent $10 billion on this machine. For what? And the reply was the scientist got very excited. He said, control. We get control. That's what they want. They want to become God. So with that kind of mentality, they're attacking material nature. They're trying to manipulate material nature to their desires. And the result is a disaster. The whole planet is so polluted, with plastic and oil and this and that. It's a disaster. But Varnashram is how to live in tune and harmony with material nature. You live within the seasonal cycles, yeah? Spring, summer, autumn, winter. In India you have 6, in the West 4. But the idea is that within 1 year's cycle, everything that you need for living is supplied. In the spring, you put the seeds. In the summer, it flourishes and grows. In the autumn, you collect what you've planted. And in the winter time, you live off, the produce that you've grown in the year before. And you leave the fields fallow for some time. Then they get replenished with vitamins and minerals. Then the next year, you're ready to go again. And you interface with material nature. Yeah? And how do you interface with material nature? Cows and bulls. No tractors, no oil, no rubber, no electricity. Cows and bulls. which every year give birth to more cows and bulls, which enable you to work the land perpetually. So you're living within this living cycle. That's Varnashram. That's Varnashram. Not what we have now, where everything is being destroyed, by the greed and lust of puffed up so-called scientists who can't see that, the next one down is going to be them, despite their controls or attempts to control. What have they succeeded in doing? They're not controlling anything. They can't even control their own minds. So it's a science, it's a social science. We have to learn how to implement this. When you can implement this cycle, natural cycle, then you'll really understand, the provision that Krishna has provided. What's that verse about the rains? You do the jagya, the rains come. Louder. Yes. You have to do the jagya. Material nature is actually under control, but not scientific control. It's under Krishna's control. So when Krishna becomes pleased, when you do the jagya and you recognize that he is the Lord of everything, then everything is supplied to you. You live very peacefully, very naturally, no difficulty, and you get the chance to practice Krishna consciousness. Because when you're a farmer, you don't spend all day, every day on the fields. There's certain times of the year when you have to work hard. There's many times during the year when you don't have to do very much at all. The plants are just growing, the rain is coming, and you get a lot of time off. So that time off you spend in practicing Krishna consciousness. That's a perfect system. That's Varnashram. But we're very, very, very far away from that right now. Okay. We're going to finish at this point. I hope that was useful, or at least entertaining. So thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
His Grace Hari Shauri Prabhu ki